The cold wind howled through the city streets as Ethan tightened his grip on the handlebars of his old battered scooter. He had been out since early morning, rushing from one end of town to the other, delivering food orders to customers who barely glanced at him. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, barely. And today, like every other day, he had no choice but to push forward. No matter how tired he felt, his phone buzzed with a new order, and when he checked the details, his eyes widened. The delivery address belonged to one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. Ethan had never been there before. He had only heard stories. Stories of towering mansions, shiny sports cars, and people who lived lives he could only dream of. For a moment, he hesitated. He had made plenty of deliveries to wealthy areas, and the experience was always the same. The rich barely acknowledged his existence. Some didn't even open the door, instructing him to leave the food outside through a small intercom. But he shook off the thought and revved his scooter. A delivery was a delivery. He had a job to do. As he weaved through traffic, his mind wandered. What would it be like to live in a house like that? To not have to count every penny or worry about rent at the end of the month. He pushed the thoughts aside. Daydreaming wouldn't change anything. He was a delivery man, and this was his reality. 15 minutes later, he pulled up to a massive iron gate. It was the kind of entrance you only saw in movies. Tall, black, and lined with gold detailing. Before he could even reach for the buzzer, the gate creaked open on its own, as if some invisible force had been watching him. Ethan hesitated before riding through. The driveway was long, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and glowing lanterns that illuminated the path. When he finally reached the front of the house, he couldn't believe his eyes. The mansion was enormous, almost like a palace, giant glass. Windows reflected the night sky, and expensive cars were parked in a neat row by the entrance. He had never seen so much wealth in one place. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the neatly packed food order from his delivery bag and walked up to the door. Before he could knock, the door swung open. A man stood there, dressed in an expensive suit. He was tall, well-groomed, and had the kind of confidence that came from knowing he had everything he could ever want. But his eyes were cold. "You're late," the man said, his voice sharp and impatient. Ethan glanced at his phone. He was right on time. "Sir, I don't need your excuses." The man cut him off, rolling his eyes. "Do you know how much my time is worth? More than your entire salary. I can guarantee that." Ethan swallowed his frustration. He had dealt with rude customers before, but something about this man's arrogance stung more than usual. He held out the food bag. "Here's your order." The man didn't take it. Instead, he smirked, tilting his head slightly, as if observing something pathetic. "You know, guys like you'll never be anything more than what you are right now. A delivery boy, running around the city, scraping together whatever little money you can." He laughed under his breath. "And yet, you think you're important enough to stand on my doorstep." Ethan's fingers clenched around the bag. He wasn't looking for trouble. He just wanted to do his job and leave. But the humiliation burned in his chest like fire. "I don't think I'm important," Ethan finally said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm just here to do my job." The millionaire chuckled, shaking his head. "A job? This isn't a job, kid. This is what people do when they have no ambition, no future." He crossed his arms. "Tell me, do you ever look at yourself in the mirror and wonder where you went wrong?" Ethan said nothing. He had heard insults before, but this one cut deeper. Maybe because, deep down, he had asked himself the same question more times than he cared to admit. The man took a step forward, his smile turning into something cruel. "You'll never be on this side of the door. Never!" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "Here," he said, waving it in the air. "A little extra. Maybe you can save up and buy yourself some self-respect." Ethan stared at the bill, his jaw tightening. The way the man held it, it wasn't a tip. It was a mockery, a reminder of where he stood in the world. But then, something shifted inside him. He realized something. This man, despite all his wealth, his mansion, his expensive suit, was empty. Someone who needed to belittle others, to feel important. And suddenly, the shame Ethan felt began to fade. He took a deep breath and slowly stepped back. "No, thank you," he said, his voice steady. The millionaire raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Ethan met his gaze. "I don't need your money." For the first time, the man looked surprised, as if he couldn't believe someone like Ethan would turn down his offer. Ethan turned to leave, but before he could take another step, the millionaire spoke again, his voice laced with amusement. "Suit yourself," he said. "But remember this moment, delivery boy, because it's the closest you'll ever get to real success." Ethan didn't stop. He walked back to his scooter, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He didn't have money, power, or status, but he had something this man never would: dignity. And as he rode off into the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. Ethan rode through the dimly lit streets, the cold air stinging his face as he replayed the encounter in his mind. The man's words echoed in his head, "You'll never be on this side of the door." It wasn't the first time someone had looked down on him, but tonight it felt different. Maybe it was the way the millionaire had smirked at him, like he was less than nothing. Or maybe it was because, for the first time, Ethan didn't just feel angry. He felt challenged. When he got back to his tiny apartment, he set his helmet down and collapsed onto his worn-out couch. The place was small, barely big enough for the essentials, but it was home. He glanced around, seeing the cracks in the walls, the second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. This was his reality. No luxury cars, no mansion, no power, just struggle. His phone buzzed with a message from his best friend, Liam. "Liam, yo, how was work?" Ethan hesitated before replying. He didn't want to vent, but he needed to talk to someone. "Ethan, same as always, except I met the worst customer ever tonight, Liam. Worse than the guy who threw a drink at you last month. Ethan, some millionaire who thought I was beneath him. Told me I'd never be successful. Tried to hand me $100 like I was some charity case." Liam's response came almost immediately. "Liam, what a joke. You should have taken his money and ordered the most expensive meal just to waste it." Ethan smirked, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. "Ethan, it's not about the money. It's just, I don't know. He acted like he was better than me just because I do deliveries. Like my life is worthless compared to his." There was a long pause before Liam replied. "Liam, you know that's not true. You work harder than most people. And let's be real, guys like that, they don't know what real struggle is." Ethan sighed, tossing his phone onto the couch. He knew Liam was right, but still, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. That night, he barely slept. He kept thinking about the man's house, the cars, the confidence in his voice. What did it feel like to have that kind of life? To walk into any room knowing you belonged? More than anything, he wanted to prove to himself that he wasn't just some delivery boy. He was more than that. He had to be. The next morning, Ethan started his shift as usual. The city was alive with honking cars and the chatter of people rushing to work. As he made his deliveries, he found himself thinking about his future. Was this all there was? Racing through traffic, dropping off food, and collecting small tips that barely covered expenses. At a red light, he spotted a group of young professionals outside a sleek office building, dressed in tailored suits, laughing over coffee. A deep frustration settled in his gut. He wanted more, but how? He had no degree, no connections, and no idea where to start. Later that day, as he was picking up another order from a high-end restaurant, he overheard two men in suits talking. "Investing is all about timing," one of them said. "I got in early on crypto, made my first million before I was 25. Ethan lingered near the counter, pretending to check his phone, but listening closely. "I'm looking into startups now," the other man said. "You gotta spot the opportunity before the rest of the world does." Ethan's mind raced. Investing? Startups? These were things he had never even considered. People always said you had to be rich to make money. But what if that wasn't true? What if there was a way in? That night, he stayed up researching. He watched videos on business, investing, and self-made millionaires. He read articles about people who started with nothing and built their way up. The more he learned, the more his mindset started to shift. But knowledge wasn't enough. He needed a plan. Over the next few weeks, Ethan cut back on all unnecessary expenses. No more takeout, no more small splurges. Every extra dollar went into savings. He started waking up earlier, listening to business podcasts while doing deliveries. The more he learned, the more he realized he didn't need to be born rich. He needed to be smart. One night, Liam came over with a six-pack, plopping onto Ethan's couch. "Dude, you've been acting different lately. What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, then finally said, "I don't want to do this forever." Liam raised an eyebrow. "What, deliveries?" Ethan nodded. "I want more, and I think I can do something bigger. I've been learning about business, investments, ways to make money outside of just working paycheck to paycheck." Liam let out a low whistle. "Man, I've never heard you talk like this before." Ethan leaned forward. "That guy, the millionaire, he pissed me off. But in a way, I think he woke something up in me. He made me realize that I don't want to stay in the same place forever. I want to prove to myself that I can do better." Liam was quiet for a moment. Then he smirked. "Well, if you're going to take over the world, you better let me in on the plan." Ethan laughed, but deep down, he knew this was serious. This wasn't just a passing thought. It was the beginning of something real. The next few months were a blur. Ethan started working on a side hustle, flipping second-hand electronics online. It wasn't much at first, but every sale brought him closer to something bigger. He made mistakes, lost money, learned from it, and kept going. Then one night, he got a notification on his phone. A message from someone interested in a product he had listed. When he clicked on the profile, his heart stopped. It was the millionaire, the same man who had humiliated him. Ethan stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The same man who once looked down on him, now wanted to buy something from him. A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. Fate had just handed him an opportunity, and this time, he wasn't just some delivery boy. He was something more. Ethan stared at his phone, his heart pounding. Of all the people who could have been interested in his listing, it had to be him. The same arrogant millionaire who had humiliated him on that cold night, treating him like he was nothing. But now, the tables had turned, at least a little. This man wanted something from him. For a moment, Ethan considered ignoring the message. Maybe it wasn't worth it. But then, He thought about how far he had come, the long nights, the sacrifices, the risks he had taken to start building something of his own. He wasn't the same struggling delivery guy anymore. He had built a small but growing business, and this was an opportunity. He took a deep breath and typed back a response, keeping it professional. Ethan, thanks for reaching out. The item is available. When would you like to pick it up? The reply came quickly. Millionaire. Can you deliver it? I'll pay extra. Ethan couldn't help but smirk. The irony. After everything, the millionaire was now asking him to make a delivery. For a second, he thought about refusing. Maybe even calling him out, reminding him of that night. But no, he didn't need to. The fact that this man was unknowingly reaching out to him was already proof of how unpredictable life could be. Ethan, sure, I can bring it to you tomorrow. When the time came, Ethan rode his scooter through the familiar streets. But this time, he felt different. He wasn't just another worker rushing to make ends meet. He was someone who had taken control of his life when he pulled up to the mansion's gates. That same sinking feeling from before tried to creep in, but he pushed it away. He wasn't here as a delivery boy this time. He was here as a businessman. Gates opened automatically, and as he rode up the long driveway, he felt the weight of the moment settling in. He was walking right back into the place where he had been belittled. But now the power dynamic had shifted. The front door opened, and there he was. The same man, dressed in another expensive suit. Looking as polished as ever, he glanced at Ethan, not recognizing him at first. You got the item? He asked casually. Ethan nodded and pulled it from his bag. Keeping his face neutral, the man took it, inspecting it briefly, then smiled in satisfaction. Nice! I've been looking for one of these for a while. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of cash. Here, keep the change. Ethan took the money, but didn't move. He studied the man for a moment, debating whether or not to say anything. And then he decided to. You don't remember me, do you? Ethan said, his voice calm. The millionaire frowned slightly, his eyes scanning Ethan's face. Then slowly, realization dawned on him. His expression shifted from confidence to something else. Something almost uncomfortable. You're the delivery guy, he murmured. Ethan nodded. Yeah, I was. For the first time, the man didn't have a smug comeback. He just stood there, silent. Ethan let the moment linger. He didn't need to rub it in. The situation spoke for itself. Finally, he smiled. Not out of pettiness, but because he knew deep inside he had won. Not in a way that required revenge or harsh words, but in a way that mattered. He had proved to himself that he was more than what people assumed about him. Take care, Ethan said simply. Before turning and walking away, as he rode off, he felt lighter. The past no longer held him down. He wasn't chasing validation from people who looked down on him. He was chasing something bigger, his own success, on his own terms, and he was just getting started.